thanks everyone, all attendees for joining today's webinar. The topic is Finding Your Startup CEO, Part 2. This is focused on sourcing talent, CEO and beyond for the early founding team. I'm Matt Cohen. I'm one of the managing partners at OUP, and I focus on life science investing efforts at the firm. Katie, next slide, please. So today we're going to be joined, and I'm joined by three esteemed panelists. They all have expertise in this area of sourcing top talent for startups, although all with different backgrounds, which is great. So I'll have each of them introduce themselves. John, can we start with you?
Yeah, great. First of all, thanks, Matt, and thanks to Mark Singer also for inviting me to participate in this event. I know the folks there at Osage and had interactions with you guys over the years, so it's great to be here. I'm an academic, so I'm on the faculty at Northwestern University. I run an institute here that's focused on translational biomedical engineering research. I think it's one of the largest academic groups in biomedical engineering with a very strong emphasis on translation. Myself, I have extensive experience in launching companies, about a dozen over the last 30 years, starting with a company that we launched when I finished up my PhD at MIT, all the way to a company we launched just last month. But I'm not involved in any of those companies at an operational level, really as a founder, co-founder, member of the board in all cases, with an equity position, and so involved in recruiting and have some experience in locating CEOs, and as relevant to this conversation. All of the companies that we do, though, are built around hard tech, just so everybody understands. It's hardware, it's materials, it's physical science, electrical engineering. There's oftentimes a software data component. I don't have any experience with therapeutic companies, any experience in pure software plays either. But in terms of hardware, I've been involved in a broad range of startups, all the way from semiconductor metrology tools, photovoltaics, display technologies, all the way to FDA-regulated biomedical devices, ranging from bootstrapped kind of lifestyle companies with no investors, just selling products, making profit, that type of thing, to those that have been supported with JDAs with large companies, philanthropy, all the way to those that we built around traditional VC investment, ranging all the way from $0 equity dollars raised up to a little north of 100 million. Several exits, some lucrative, some not, but no bankruptcies and no cases where a technology failed. Other kinds of business circumstances could make things difficult, but the technologies have always worked. And so I'm currently involved in three companies that are kind of at the north end of that spectrum of money raised: X-Display, Epicor Biosystems, and Cybele Health. One that's kind of in the middle range, 30 million raised, Rayos, and then two on that other end of the spectrum in the form of Verify and Neurolux. And so happy to share my experiences in locating CEOs. And thanks again, Matt, for involving me.
Thanks, John. That's great background. We're looking forward to your perspectives here. Sam, could you go next?
Yeah, of course. I'm Sam. I am the head of talent for Madrona Venture Labs. We are the venture studio arm of Madrona Venture Group, which is the oldest, largest, and most prolific VC fund in the Pacific Northwest. Our team on the studio side has been around for about 10 years, and we're started as a way for Madrona to operationalize its involvement with the company creation process. So that means we both recruit founders to work on their own ideas that they bring to us, and we also pair founders with ideas that we develop internally, and we help them get those initial concepts into seed-funded businesses, usually over the period of 3 to 9 months. So de-risk and fast track doing something early stage for entrepreneurs that want to get out and do their own thing, but for financial or life reasons or just lack of experience reasons may struggle to do that. I have been with the team for almost 3 years, and our focus during my time with them has been on enterprise AI, meaning that I mostly work on software companies that I would describe as B2B SaaS companies. So that will inform some of my perspective and the advice that I give today, given our focus area, although I think it's pertinent to any sort of company creation process, the general philosophy that we use. And before coming to Madrona Venture Labs, I was actually on the executive search side of things. So have been working with startups to place both founders and also build out their teams for a number of years now, and excited to be here.
Great. Great to have you, Sam. Josh.
Yeah, Matt, Osage, thanks for including myself as well as Klein Hirsch. By background, I'm one of the partners of our organization. We're 100% dedicated to the life sciences / healthcare perspective, med tech, health tech. For the insights that I will share today will be on the therapeutics, anything small molecule, biologic, cell, gene. We partner closely with seed / Series A into the largest of large enterprises in the life science community. Since 2021, I'd say our team of 36 have completed over 2,000 CEO, CSO, heads of R&D, board hires, both in the States as well as internationally. Been doing this since 2002. Have an office located right outside of Philadelphia in the Horsham area and another in Center City, Philadelphia.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Great to have you. So the webinar today is going to be mostly discussion based, and we're going to dive into some of the main subject matter shortly. But first, just a few logistics for today. A recording of the webinar will be available on OUP's partner portal, and a recording will also be publicly available via our YouTube channel. The partner portal itself, that's an online portal for tech transfer officers and researchers at all of our partner universities, and it's full of lots of relevant tech transfer and startup content. And once you're in the portal, for which you do need to register if you've not already done that, you'll find a downloadable presentation deck for today. You'll find the video link for the webinar here on the webinars page. And it's all that's under the startup resources section on the portal. And then all of those resources I just described, you can find via the QR codes on this slide. Just pull up your phone and do that now. We do, of course, encourage questions throughout the webinar. At the bottom of the screen is a Q&A tool. You can submit your questions on that and use that instead of trying to use the chat. We did get a ton of questions ahead of time, and we'll be using a lot of those for today's webinar as well. We have other upcoming webinars of interest that might be of interest to folks here. Friday will be an info session on Equalize Startups. That's a program for mentorship training, networking for academic women entrepreneurs. And that currently has its applications open for the 2025 cohorts. On October 8th, we have our Ask a VC webinar with two of my co-managing partners, Bill Harrington and Mark Singer, and they'll answer questions the audience has on various parts of the VC investment process and trends in investing for academic startups. And then on October 15th, there'll be a webinar featuring investors in the AI space, discussing that industry and what particularly interests them for investments in AI. And then lastly, in November, we'll host a webinar on venture studios. And so please stay tuned for registration information on that webinar as well. Next slide, please. So just a really brief intro on OUP. For those who don't know us, we're a venture capital fund. We partner with academic institutions to invest in their startups, and we do that often by exercising participation rights that are available through the licenses they have with their startups. As part of that partnership, these institutions share in our profits. They receive a lot of programmatic support on tech transfer and academic startups. We're now investing out of our fourth fund, which we just finished raising last year. And over the course of those four funds, we've made investments in over 140 companies in really all areas of deep science, many of those companies successfully exiting either through IPO or M&A. Next slide, please. So this is just a slide showing some of our portfolio companies, but again, we have a lot of breadth, both life sciences and tech, and we're always happy to talk to anyone about our model. So please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to. So with that, we will move on to our subject of today, which is finding CEOs and other top talent for startups from academia. So Josh, let's start off with you. Maybe starting from the beginning or the early stages of an academic startup, in your opinion, when should a nascent startup company, and for you particularly life science or biotech, really start to recruit its first CEO?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, we get that question often, and our responses often sit around this. Where's the data? how compelling is the science? Is it ready for prime time? And so I guess as you think about when's the right time to start recruiting the CEO, it's never too early to start those conversations. But at what point in time do you need a CEO? What are the goals that you're looking to achieve? If you're looking to raise capital in the next 12 to 18 months, is there enough there? So the rules that we sort of think of, like what are the expectations of the CEO? Who's going to be involved? And is it compelling enough science? Is it mature enough science to recruit the CEO that you might want? Another thing to really think about, are there CEOs that we're going to have today to get you from point A to B and then from B to C? So through that lens, like it depends on, like, does the company have resources? Does it want a full-time CEO? Is it a part-time CEO? So I think that starts the conversation with the board, the collaborators. And so I think the right time is immediately to start socializing the company, the background, what's going to be compelling around it, and then starting those conversations. But most likely, it's when the company's ready to start raising some real capital.
And so that's really helpful, but could you also talk us through maybe the process if you're gonna go recruit a CEO and you decide, well, we have a little bit of capital and we're going to use a recruiter to do that. What's the process of working with someone like you to find a startup CEO, and what should a startup be asking you, and what information do they need to bring you to be able to successfully go find somebody?
Yeah. So we often said what are the key selling points? What's uniquely differentiated about this opportunity? How does this compare to markets? The questions that someone should be asking us as the recruiter: what are you seeing in the market landscape? What are the dynamics? How are we going to win? How are we going to attract this individual? What does the compensation look like? Do we have the right economics? What other successful searches have you completed in this area? What have you seen work? What have you seen not work? Right? Set my expectations on, are we doing a search in 9 months, 6 months, 12 months? How your most successful searches, what has it looked like? Your most challenging searches, what's gone wrong, what's gone well? And so much about search, and Sam could probably talk to this as well as John. The value is, like, you get the outcome, that's the hire, everyone high fives. But through a search process or processes, you get unique insights. What's the market saying? Where are the unique aspects? Or there's no way you're going to be able to recruit someone with this for this period of time. Or, like, should we level down our expectations? Should we level up our expectations? So I think when you get the right partner that's mixed into this, you're getting the right outcome, no doubt. But you're also getting the unique insights that allow you to shape the narrative. It could also help you share when you're pitching to other venture capitalists, thinking about business development opportunities. So I hope that lens, Matt and team, is a little bit insightful and helpful. But there's some of the things that we think about, and often questions we get asked.
I mean, I like that, right? I think often people think about, well, I'm going to go pitch my startup to VCs because, I'm going to get good feedback. But actually pitching your startup idea to a potential CEO, you're going to get a lot of good feedback too. That's another way to get great feedback.
Yeah, sure. So for us, and I would imagine many others, keep a very active log of all the outreach. Anyone that opts in, the reasons why. Anyone that opts out, the reasons why, right? And then, so are we building a consistent message? Are we getting a consistent theme? How are you refining this? How are you refining the pitch? Maybe we should be leading with a later asset, or we should be over-indexing on the technology, or the technology needs to vet out until it's another 6 months so you can really recruit someone. Maybe you shouldn't be going to market to the venture groups and holding back until you have the right narrative. Or, quite frankly, many people use a deck, right? The deck will say, this isn't ready for prime time. This is not like a Series A ready to be funded enterprise or seed. These are the suggestions I would add to the deck. So going through a search process, or having people that are willing to, one, invest for themselves because they think it could be opportunity, but also give real feedback, could be constructive as you're building your story and the company going forward.
Yeah. So John, I'm sure you've done some searches across all the startups you've formed, and what are some of maybe examples of some of the phenotypes of the initial CEOs for your startup companies, and then how did you actually even meet those people?
Yeah, I'll share some of my own specific experiences, but maybe just a few high-level comments to start. So for our companies, we've located CEOs by several different mechanisms, ranging from search firms, at the national level to, people pulled in from my own extended network, to subject area experts, maybe emerging from my group, my research group, our institute, or collaborators of ours, all the way to people that we've located from business school classes that I've been involved in. And so, we've had successes and failures with these different modes. I would say overall, and these are just my own personal experiences, I'm not trying to, generalize at all, but the best candidates for our startups have come from people with deep domain expertise. So that means engineering or medicine for the kinds of companies that we've launched, and those who are also within my orbit of networks and contacts. And so they're known quantities. These are people I know, people who've worked with people I know. And so I kind of know what I'm getting, with that particular individual. And in many cases, they might not have the full complement of skills that you ultimately need, but you can kind of fill those gaps by, building boards and advisors around them to provide, maybe the necessary business and strategic advice that they need, at any given time. And again, this is not a general statement, and I'm sure Josh and Sam and others do a much better job, but my own personal experience with search firms has not been as fruitful. And I think it's because these are candidates that are largely unknown to me. And so you have to try to figure out who they are, in an interview process. Sometimes that can work, sometimes not. It tends to be a little bit difficult. In many cases, they come in, again, my own experiences, without deep, intimate knowledge of the specific technology that forms the basis of the company, in many cases, novel technology. And so the fact they don't have knowledge or experience in it is not surprising, but it's core to the company. And sometimes the interests and priorities might not kind of align with the needs. So these are definitely not hard rules, just my own experiences. But maybe I could layer on top of that some very specific examples, maybe 3-4 of the companies that we've launched, just to give people a flavor of the breadth and the diversity of people that you can find that can do the job well. And so the first company we launched was back in 1995, as I was graduating with a PhD out of MIT. It's called Active Impulse Systems, and they built very sophisticated laser-based metrology tools for semiconductor manufacturing. And that turned out to be very successful from a financial standpoint, later acquired just three years later by Philips. The CEO of that company had no technical background whatsoever. He's a real estate guy. We found him through a VC firm that my advisor back at MIT had experience with, and he was recommended to us. And so he was fantastic because he was high energy, he's very strategic, very good business acumen, and he understood kind of what he didn't know and was coachable in that sense. And so he surrounded himself to sort of fill the gaps on the technology. So that kind of worked. 2 other examples just to give people a flavor, and I have many others, but I don't want to spend too much time. But the next one was launched in 2007 called Simprius, and it was a semiconductor device company that ended up being a photovoltaics company. And the CEO there's was a VP at Dow Chemical, who had transferred out of Dow to get involved in startups. And he was an interim CEO at a startup company launched by a faculty colleague of mine at MIT. And so that's how I got introduced to this particular person. He was very attracted to what we were talking about and stepped down from his position as interim CEO at this other startup to take the reins. And that worked out well. Third example is MC10, which we launched in 2009. And so there, the CEO was brought to us by the lead VC firm that led our Series A. Great guy, did not have the domain experience, was a first-time CEO, and so maybe not a great fit in a sense. And we ended up having to kind of change CEOs a few years later. Great guy, but just wasn't quite aligned with what we needed. And then just a fourth example, many others if people are interested, is Cybel Health, which we launched in 2019. And there the CEO is MD PhD, was on the dermatology faculty here at Northwestern. I got to know him through some collaborations. He actually did a short postdoctoral stint in our institute and then became the CEO. And just fantastic because bioengineering background, intimately knowledgeable about, kind of a clinical workflow and medical reimbursement and so on. And so it's a company built around FDA approved wireless wearable devices. So anyway, just a diversity of different examples. It's not a formula by any means, but just some different experiences that we've had.
That's great. Great. And we'll come back to, I think, some of those things as we go forward. But Sam, so at Madrona Venture Labs, at what stage do those startups that you guys focus on typically have an initial CEO or need an initial CEO?
So we partner with companies that are really just starting off. So they're pre-seed, sure, but they're really just an idea. I think describing them, at least when we start working with them as a company, is a little generous. And usually they originate either with a founding CTO or more commonly a founding CEO. And then from there, they'll hire probably 3 to 4 other folks at the pre-seed stage before they eventually go on and raise a seed round of funding. Now, for the founding CEO and the founding CTO, something that John said that really resonates with my experience is that those founders, something about their background gives them a competitive advantage to work on that particular concept or idea and the pain point that we've identified to potentially build a company in. At Madrona Venture Labs, we call this founder market fit. But the idea is that it's very, very hard to do a startup. And unfortunately, the reality is most startups will die before they see a successful exit or a successful outcome. And if for whatever reason, something about your background gives you a leg up to build that kind of company, gives you a leg up to build a product that's innovative and speaks to the pain and convinces investors of your credibility, you're more likely to succeed. And so we really try to look for that with both of those founder positions, the founding CEO and the founding CTO.
So what is maybe you can walk us through this? What does a typical founding team composition actually look like for
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and share a slide that I created here just because I think it's easier to see a visual versus having me talk through it. But again, this is an example for the types of companies that we most typically work on at Madrona Venture Labs, which are enterprise AI companies. So the idea here is that the company needs to land a couple of customers that are large enterprises as they work through the initial phases of the company creation process and then try to secure funding. And so the first person is usually the founding CEO. The next person is the head of engineering. As I mentioned prior, sometimes those positions are flip-flopped. So the head of engineering or the CTO comes first and then the CEO, but those are almost always our first 2 hires. And then from there, the real emphasis is on building a product that is technically complex and also ready for prime time, so ready for users to interact with. And because of that, we usually emphasize folks that have technical experience as the next couple of hires onto the team. So usually that's a founding full stack engineer, someone that doesn't specialize in one particular tech area, but is a multi-tool generalist who's excited about delving into a bunch of different problems, can work across the stack for you. And if and when the startup pivots, they can weather those pivots well. The next person is usually someone to think about data and aggregate data and translate that into insights for the rest of the team to use. So that's a machine learning engineer, an applied scientist, a data scientist. The title changes, but the responsibility is similar. And then finally, the team will think about bringing on a designer to package the work that the engineering team is doing and make it user-friendly. What you don't see here are product folks or marketing folks or sales folks or operational people. And the reason for that is because unfortunately for the CEO at the early stage, you're operating with a limited budget and a lot of that falls onto you. So a lot of the functions that you don't see represented here that are not on the technical side will end up being shouldered by the founder CEO. This looks different for companies in different domains. So for example, companies that are building consumer first products, so targeting end users to use them that are like you and I, as opposed to large businesses, will often emphasize marketers earlier because they really need to get the product in the hands of as many people as possible. But here, again, the emphasis for us is usually on the technical side, which is why it looks the way that it does.
And Sam, there's a couple different people there on the team, and oftentimes these early companies, we call them companies, don't have very much money to pay these people. So how do if let's say you're the founder, you own all of the company, maybe you own all the shares. How do you get people like full stack engineers to come work for you if you don't have a lot you can pay them?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a constant challenge for us, especially given that a lot of tech talent is pretty well compensated. Especially here in Seattle, you have people that are coming from Amazon or Microsoft. Apple has a pretty large headquarter here, as does Expedia. So they're used to that kind of compensation package and less used to something on the startup side that's lower in terms of the base compensation, but potentially higher in terms of the equity ownership. And so the first thing that's just the reality of working at a startup is that folks need to be ready and willing to take at least a short-term pay cut when it comes to their base compensation. And sometimes that's not doable for someone. And that's totally okay. But we coach our founders to try to preempt that by talking about it early and addressing it early with people. So you're not wasting the time of either party. And the other thing to think about there is many startups at this stage can't provide citizenship sponsorship. And so for many folks that are still working to get their citizenship or on visa or have some other limitation there when it comes to who they can be hired by, it's important for founders to address that early. And then if you have found someone that is willing and eager to take potentially a short-term trade-off when it comes to the base compensation to emphasize the equity ownership, you want to try to educate people around what that equity is worth. And again, that's going to look very different at different companies. So I'm not going to give ranges or numbers here just because all startups are different. But getting comfortable with that as a founder and articulating in a way that's approachable and makes sense to people, I think is really crucial. And then get them excited about the vision. The vision of the company will change, especially for early stage startups as things pivot, but there should be something that's a real selling point for people about the general pain point that you as a company are trying to address. The other thing that I try to emphasize to founders is at this stage, you are your brand. And so, yes, the vision is going to pivot. And so you may have to adjust your messaging there, but you should get people excited about the opportunity to work for you and work for your team, and be your own evangelist in that way. And I think finally, startups really emphasize career growth and career development. So especially for folks that are a little bit earlier in career, hungry, want to get exposure to a bunch of different things, I found that to be a really effective selling point for talent. That if you come and you work at a startup for 2 to 5 years, call it, the amount of learning and exposure that you get just is so much greater than if you were to work in one specific lane doing a repetitive task at a larger company.
Yeah. And there was a question submitted around, guidance for equity share compensation. I think Sam's right. It can really vary quite a lot. I'll put a plug in for OUP. We do have a webinar on that topic and how you might allocate equity and think about equity, and options for the team longer term. So that's on our YouTube channel. And so you can definitely check that out. And we do give some ranges based on the startups that OUP has, interacted with or invested in. So you can definitely check that out for more maybe specific quantitative information if that's what you're looking for. But Josh and John, this is a hot button issue. Like, how do you get a CEO or a team if you don't have any money to pay them? And I think it's on the mind of a lot of founders and tech transfer folks. So I want to get more thoughts around this from you both as well.
So I think it went to where I started the conversation. Be proactive in that relationship building, bring people along with you on the journey. Where Sam was saying, you have to be able to sell, you have to be able to present, see what the opportunity is going to look like, not only today, but long term, right? And then we call them swim coaches. Like, who are those swim coaches that are with you, that want to support you, that want to champion you, that want to open up their network? And then how proactively are you working within that known network to you to extend that network? So when we think about recruiting, and it might dovetail into the next, it's never like you speak to someone today and they're like, I can't wait to do your job, right? Or this opportunity. It's that proactive. And John also mentioned this, like he likes to hire from he's had more success on his own than through other search firms because they know the people, or they might. So the more time invested in that relationship build, understanding how they communicate, how they lead, how they inspire. Do they have a track record of having people to come and join them in their other opportunities? Right. I think that's really paramount. So I guess in summary, is being proactive, having the swim coaches, and creating a narrative and drawing parallels to your company and other companies that were similar to this that had great successes. So if you know what the market landscape looks like of companies that were similar to this, but 10 years ago, they were seed stage, or they didn't even have $100 million or $10 million or $3 million, and they became great commercial successes, I would be helping shape that into the narrative of your recruitment pitch.
Can I add one thing about hiring from in-network here? I think it's super valuable to hire in network because you can get a little bit more of a check on what was this person like to work with, given either a personal connection you have with them or a referral. And they're more likely to work for you than someone that you reach out to cold or is introduced to you through a firm, as John mentioned, that you may or may not know. I think one of the things to be careful of in emphasizing in-network hiring comes to the diversity piece. A lot of, especially software tech startups in the industry that I work with, unfortunately have a negative reputation of not being as diverse as they could be. And often that's because the founder emphasizes in-network hiring early because it's faster, folks are known quantities, and they want to get stuff done and not spend months trying to fill an open job rec, which is totally understandable. But unfortunately, many of them get to a point where they have hired 20 to 25 people. All of them come from their same school, or have gone to the same fraternity, or have some sort of other connection, which I don't think is in the best interest of businesses. And I think just from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, something that's important to think about. Because often when I worked in executive search, we would get called in to place a C or a VP level leader on the team, with someone, the client that we were working with, often emphasizing that they'd like this person to be someone from a gender diverse background, which is awesome, that they're thinking about that proactively. But it comes at a point where they, as a company, haven't hired a gender diverse person at that level of leadership before. And so it becomes a little bit more difficult to convince someone to come on board potentially with that identity. So just something that I wanted to flag as we're talking about in-network referrals and hiring, that it's super powerful and a real positive, I believe, but just to be mindful in your use of it.
Yeah, Matt, just to kind of come back to the question that you posed to Josh and myself, I think I understood it as being, how do you find a CEO when you might not have cash available? Was that the
Yeah,
question?
I think that's a problem that the vast majority of academic startups face. They haven't raised any money yet, and then maybe
Yeah.
the founder still is a professor and has a full-time job and wants to partner
Yeah.
with somebody to help them, but they can't pay them. How do they do that?
Yeah. So I guess we've approached that difficulty in sort of four different ways through my own experiences. One is oftentimes, highly qualified CEOs will have some level of financial independence. They don't need a salary. They can run, with their own, finances for a year or so. If they have confidence, they can raise money, and then they kind of get involved at that level. That's happened a few times. That's not unusual, I would say. And in fact, my experience is almost typical. The other, it sort of goes along with that, is that, if they get involved at a stage where, maybe you don't have cash, but you have great visibility on cash, maybe you're engaged with a philanthropic organization that wants to get involved, or perhaps you've already started, a dialogue with a VC firm. CEOs can jump in with confidence that, 2-3 months out, they'll be able to close the first round of financing. And so that, runway for them to operate without a salary gets, reduced to a point that, that level of financial independence is not very significant. So that happens, occasionally. The other thing is, just highlight this for the academics on the call. SBIR and STTR mechanisms are fantastic. I used to think that, those weren't worth pursuing, but they're actually really wonderful mechanisms. And you can, as an academic founder, get in and write a proposal for a phase 1 SBIR, STTR. You can get, maybe $750,000 that way, 9-month runway. It's a very simple proposal. It's only 6 pages, purely technical. So it's actually easier than a traditional, standard, NSF grant that you might write to support graduate students in your group. Much easier, and the threshold for funding is lower, is my experience. So these are very, very doable mechanisms to bring in that initial cash. And once you have, 500, 750,000, then, CEO, recruiting becomes a lot easier, because then they're sitting on a resource there that they can use to, raise more money. And by the way, phase 2, mechanisms, which, you can pursue after that phase 1 period has elapsed, a little bit more of a heavy lift on the proposal for phase 2. But if you win one of those, it's, 2.5 million over, a 24-month period. So quite nice. And, completely non-dilutive, is the other, attractive, feature of that. So I'd encourage academics to kind of think about that mechanism. It's been very good for us lately. Over the last 5-7 years, we've really taken advantage of that. And all of the agencies are required to set aside money for those programs, NIH, NSF, DoD, all of them. So they have to do it. And a lot of times they're looking for good proposals. And then the final mechanism, sort of the fourth one, and this may or may not be, an option for you, but I've self-funded, in certain cases. So 100, 200K, give folks some walking around cash to get started, and then they can kind of build on that. So those are the mechanisms that we've found to be useful, over time.
Thanks, John. Josh, just coming back to you, I think another hot question is always, where do I go? Like, where do I even look for these people? Like, I don't have money. I can't hire you, Josh. Client Hirsch is going to be too expensive for me for now. But where should I go? What events? Are there resources online? Like, how do I even just find people in my industry to try to liaise with?
So I would imagine any conference that's relevant to you, that you could get to would be good. There's a website we use, the conferenceforum.org, that has most of the biotech aspects. If you want to do cell therapy, you're doing IO, there's tools, right? So you look at that, and then from there, I would suggest to find the agenda of who's speaking, or the attendee list, and send out an outreach, or what are the known knowns, who could connect me to said person. Anything that's local in your community, I would say get out, put yourself out there. Again, similar philosophy. All these things, it's a consistent effort to build the right relationships and tell the right story, collect the feedback. So I would go conferences, any sort of happy hours that are local to you all, friends and family, right? Get the word out there, be proactive with colleagues, also other entrepreneurs within the academic institutions. I would ask each one of them, how have you had success? What have you done well on a bootstring budget? Like they would be some of the strategies that I would deploy. And it really goes to the preparation. All these things is, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So to have a strategic view of how you're going to have these conversations, how you're going to be ready to present, and then what's your follow-up post that. Right, so many things die at at the beginning, when it should be nurtured post that dialogue. So each one of the impressions has to have a follow-up impression thereafter. And actually, I would look for each call to action. So if you meet people at conferences, you meet people at the local aspect, your swim coaches, you send those follow-up thank yous, and then moving the ball downfield. So there's some of the things that we've coached to and have seen work for some of our early stage partners that eventually do hire and partner with us or others.
That's great. And Sam, conferences also good for your industry or what MVL does, or are there other challenges or events or things one can do in the space you focus on to try to identify that first CEO?
We found a little bit less success in conferences, and it's not to say that folks that wouldn't be a good fit aren't there. But if you're thinking about hours invested versus connections made, it's a lot of time into perhaps not many connections. And so many of the founders either looking for a CEO or looking for a CTO will go to conferences expecting to get connected to folks and often find themselves chasing a lot of loose ends and having 3 days away from the core running of the business. So what works well often for our founders is networking. So reaching out to their own network or working through cold connections on LinkedIn, actually. So doing a little bit of research around companies that could be interesting target areas when it comes to a talent perspective and crafting a thoughtful message. And then if someone is interested in hopping on the line and learning more, talking to them a little bit more about the business, your vision, why the opportunity is compelling. And then, maybe this person is interested themselves, or maybe they know other people that are interested. And towards the end of the call, thanking that person for the time and then asking, hey, based on what I've told you, are there 2 to 3 other folks that you'd recommend from your network that you could introduce me to? I'd be really grateful. That allows you to really capitalize on the network effect and get introduced to someone who then knows someone. And often for our founders, that comes initially through customer connections. So meeting people that could be really interesting customers for this kind of product because of their background, telling them a little bit more about the business. And if they're interested in potentially piloting it, that's awesome. If they're interested in being a CEO, we can continue the conversation on that front too. Or even if they're interested in neither, they probably have domain insight into the area that you're trying to build a company in, and they likely have connections and a strong network there. So that strategy has worked well with us, and then utilizing investor connections and our own team's connections too, as well as our historical database.
I like the
And
customer.
one other thing that I would add, and this isn't a place to go, but everyone should be following the public companies in their space. So if you see public companies and you track the publics that are in similar range, and they were $800 million company and today they're $40 million, or what does the news feed look like if someone's had a setback or their data doesn't look good, or you have upcoming data readouts. So you you create your own internal tracker. Again, it goes to the proactive relationship, proactive knowledge of the market to get ahead of or very quickly engage with news that's going to feed into it. So again, it's not a conference, but it's on like the sphere or spectrum of data. And we believe data and efficiency rule today. So how are you aggregating the data? How are you repurposing the data? And then how are you pouncing on the data? And recognizing that some of these people may or may not have the time, but use the resources around you to create an Excel spreadsheet. Look at it every month, like where the stock was. You can see things trending. And that's just one minor thing, but like that should be an easy way for people to track how well or not. And then if you really want to dovetail into it, like what were the quality venture capital groups that were involved early days? So if high venture capital obviously see the great they hire great people, science might not work out for one reason or another. They've often hired a quite, like at the very least, a reasonably talented team to an exceptionally talented team.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think I'll be really explicit with try to say what Josh is saying, which is a company that has, like a biotech company that has the public, that has bad data and the stock tanks, there's very likely to be some very good, talented people there who are looking for their next job very soon. And you can actually build an Excel spreadsheet with a plugin that tracks stock prices on companies that maybe look in a similar space to yours. And if something doesn't go well, those people may be looking for their next role. So I think that's an awesome suggestion, and can help you start to think about, well, what companies and should I even be thinking about, where I might find employees who would be helpful to me. So I love that.
Yeah, and I would add not just the stock price actually, but just keeping on top of the news, I think is really valuable. Subscribing to some sort of newsletter like Axios Pro Rata or something that's relative to your specific domain, and then monitoring that daily and making a small practice of it, I think can really reap benefits over time. An example of that actually in the Seattle market is Amazon announced a 5-day return to work starting in January of next year. And in the past 2 weeks, I have gotten messages from so many people that work at Amazon that say, hey, I'm not interested in going back to work 5 days a week. I'm going to start looking for new opportunities, emphasizing something that's hybrid or potentially remote first. Can we catch up over the next couple of weeks to talk a little bit more about what's in your portfolio? So again, that's something that's not necessarily stock related, but does impact talent and how quickly things move.
Yeah, that's right on. And I would say everyone should be subscribing to their trade journals, like their data sets that come forward, and should create on their calendar, create 15 minutes to go through all of today's news. Today's news creates tomorrow's activities. So once you understand and recognize that, that creates a purpose, a reason to reach out. Could be good, could be bad. It could be something insightful. It could be helping shape your narrative. So all those things really come together quite nicely. So as I think everyone's hearing on our panel session in Zoom, there's not a one way to do it. There's many different angles, and you got to figure out one that most resonates with you and leveraging the resources around you.
Great. So John, maybe turning back to sort of the academic founder angle for a moment. There's some questions I wanted to ask you about before you bring in your initial, fill your initial CEO for your new startup, or you bring on an external CEO, and you're thinking about, well, how do I position myself and how I'm going to work with this person and support them and position my technology, and I want to make it appealing. And these are often maybe early career faculty who haven't done as many startups as you have. What do they have to start thinking about themselves and about their technology to have somebody say, yeah, I really want to work with you to build something cool?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say most faculty members, not all, are reasonably good salesmen because they have to sell their own research, the funding agencies, to prospective students, to the broader community. And so if they're successful as a faculty member, I think many have kind of a natural ability to sell at some level. I mean, that's not uniformly true, obviously, but I think it's not uncommon, I would say. The more successful faculty members, that is. And so I think that part is sort of naturally embedded kind of in the phenotype of successful faculty members in general. I think in my experience, the technology has to be super cool, just at a gut level, and or you have to be on a mission, a mission for greater good, or you want to change the world, and in those circumstances, the cool factor of the technology is maybe not so critical. Having both is the best scenario. And so those are the approaches that we've used. And I think for us, we're looking for CEOs who are looking to build something of engineering excellence, at a product level, that their main motivation is not to figure out how to cash out financially. And I think if you're doing engineering at a very high level and you're building unique things that are satisfying an important need, the financial piece kind of comes along naturally as a consequence of successful effort of that type. So we kind of look for CEOs who are very oriented around the engineering with an appreciation for the financial aspects, but not with a dominating priority associated with that aspect.
Helpful, very helpful. Josh, what's the recruiter's perspective on that? So what do CEOs find appealing about academic startups when they might be considering one?
So it really depends on the CEO, the candidate. So everyone's interests, right, are different. But I would say some common themes, depending on who they're going to partner with. How user-friendly is the academic? to the CEO? Like, what will that interface look like? Are they going to be trying to overshoot in terms of their involvement? Or are they really turning it over to the CEO to lead the enterprise? Has the academic been a serial co-founder before, and has it worked or has it not worked? Is this high in the sky, like this is blue sky stuff versus there's a real path to the clinic? Some people might want like change the world stuff versus I understand it, I can get to point A to B. They might want to know, is the academic going to be on the board, right? And sometimes that could be a plus. Sometimes it could be a minus if you're looking for the ability to operate as it's going to be your own company. So whatever CEO is coming in, they want the autonomy. And some want the support, and then they want more involvement. So if the academic or the science is really predicated on that, and the academic is going to be needed, how much of their time are they giving here versus are they doing 15 other startups, right? And so this is just one of 15, and really how invested are they? So there's some of the things that have worked through, like we've done many that have been serial biotech starters. We've got the onesie twosies. And then also, what is their reputation to work with? So there's some of the things that we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years. And Matt, you've probably seen a lot of this too. Is that landing with you? And is there anything that I understated or overstated that might be like worthy of a additional talk there?
No, I think that was perfect. I think that was great. And I want to give you one softball question, which was a question we got before during registration for this. Someone said, well, for an oncology startup, my therapeutic startup's in oncology, and we can apply this to any technical area or anything. But the question was, how important is it for the CEO to have clinical oncology experience? But what I think the question is more broadly is how important, and then John actually, I think, said it early, how important is specific domain expertise. John had an example where it was a real estate person who did an amazing job at his first, deep science technical startup. But some people will say, no, the CEO's got to have really deep technical knowledge. So, what's the perspective here?
We've seen it all. So in some of our searches, it's best athlete, right? Someone that can clearly communicate a vision, that can recruit a great team, that can raise capital, has proven outcomes. In other aspects, Matt, like they want, like for some of our clinical oncology searches, they need clinical oncology expertise. It might be a single asset, and they really want someone that understands the development pathways. They might want a CEO to be CEO and CMO. But the goal of a CEO is, in my opinion, is not to be the domain area expert, right? You have the CMO, the CSO, the CTO, the other areas that fill those buckets. The goal of a CEO is to obviously inspire, recruit, lead, raise capital, transact, allow their people to do what they're doing. So I think of it often, and we challenge our venture partners that are often the ones hiring us, like, do we need domain expertise or not? I would look at it most often as a plus, unless you're looking at this as a dual CEO, CMO, dual CSO, CEO. And sometimes knowing too much is sort of a challenge to let your people really do their job. So if you're a CEO that has deep clinical oncology experience and you have a CMO that's deep clinical oncology experience, how likely are you to interject, versus giving the CMO the autonomy because you've hired them? You obviously think they're good enough to do their job. So sometimes it could be a blessing and a curse. So I think the long-winded answer here is it varies. And in many of our searches, it is an ask for domain area expertise, in particular in oncology. We see it more often than not.
Yeah. And I would just caveat it to say that it doesn't, and from my experience as an investor, it doesn't mean that, especially in a biotech startup, that the CEO can't talk about the science, and that they, if I get on a call with the CEO and they go, well, I can't answer any of your science questions, let's do it on the next call. That's also not great. Like, you still have to have somebody who can, hang in there, I think, with the domain expertise. But I'm curious to get, Sam, John, your thoughts on this.
John, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I already kind of shared my perspective on this. I think domain expertise is really important. Although, in the real estate example, it's not critical. You don't have to have it. So I sort of agree with Josh on that. I do feel, however, that the CEO needs a deep appreciation and a respect for the foundational science. That's absolutely essential. Whether they have their own expertise in that particular area is certainly a nice thing to have, but maybe not an essential requirement.
So for us, I do think at the stage that we're operating, it's pretty important for the founder to have domain expertise. And that's largely because this individual is also acting as the chief salesperson for the company. So they're going to potential customers and convincing them that, yes, this product is the real deal, and giving me your confidential data that often powers the engine behind the product, it's going to be safe with us. And that is harder for a CEO to do and convince of customers if they have no domain expertise in the area. Which isn't to say that they need to be deeply knowledgeable about the technical components of it or understand all of the product nuances of this particular problem area or have deep data science expertise, for instance. But they should be able to talk about all of that and have something about their background that makes them uniquely suited to speak to the pain and give customers trust in them that they're capable of delivering on what they promise.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, John, I want to make sure we get a couple more questions in here, and we'll probably go a few minutes longer for anyone who's able to, any attendees able to stay. We will go over a little bit, I think. But I think it's important because there's a lot of attendees who are technology transfer personnel. You know, and you're an academic faculty member. How have you leveraged, or any thoughts on how university technology transfer personnel can help faculty startups with sourcing potential founders and CEOs for their startups?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I spent 13 years on the faculty at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I've been here at Northwestern for 7 years now, going on 8 years. And so I've had really outstanding relationships with the tech transfer offices at both universities. I think it's a really powerful resource for a number of reasons. One is they provide financing to cover the costs of filing patents when you might not have an entity in place that can, foot those bills themselves. And so it's almost like a bank. I mean, you have to pay them back, but they're fronting the costs, and they're handling the patent prosecution and so on, and you're taking down license and paying them back over time. So in that sense, it's a really powerful mechanism when you might be cash strapped or bootstrapping and trying to do a kind of a lean startup sort of model. So certainly at that level, these offices have been very, very powerful resources for us over the years. They also are sort of a portal for people who are interested, maybe alums from the university or maybe MBA students who are interested in understanding what technologies are bubbling up out of the university. And, they're reaching out because they may want to get involved in startups. And I think maybe specifically to your question, they're a valuable resource in that sense. In my own experience, we have not hired CEOs through that mechanism, but I can easily see how that could evolve pretty naturally. It's just circumstances have not quite been aligned for us in that sense. But we have found investors through that mechanism. So they're approaching the tech transfer office, asking about hot technologies, and then those introductions come back to us, and then we get into a conversation. And so that's been at the level of strategic investors, individual investors, and consultants and board members. Have been sourced through that pipeline. And then, the other thing is, I think most universities have some kind of incubator structures that go beyond just the tech transfer IP office that's handling patent submissions. And those incubators become kind of a really, hot area for engaging and networking and talking to other people who are starting companies and people who are coming in from the outside interested in the startups that are being launched beyond just the IP, but actual entities that have been put together around that IP. So I think it's a wonderful resource. And if you're an academic institution, definitely take the time to get to know those folks and interact with them, because they've been powerful resource for us in those various mechanisms over the years.
It sounds like that, it's an opportunity perhaps to, working with an incubator like that to be able to launch your startup without a CEO necessarily, because you're getting a lot of other support. And likewise, I would ask Sam, Madrona Venture Labs, you often talk about founder CEOs. I'm guessing that may not be the CEO forever, and that company may need a different CEO into the future. But maybe just talk a little bit about what is like working with a venture studio or a venture lab or a venture fund that has a creation vehicle like yours, and kind of worrying about, like, I'm a founder, I'm going to worry about that, deeply experienced professional CEO later, because I can work with MVL and they're going to support me. So maybe talk a little bit about the value in waiting to maybe bring in your sort of professional CEO.
Yeah, so we had an example of this a couple of years ago, where a founder of a company called Pendulum came to us, and he had developed a tool for classifying mis and disinformation on the internet, but had no way to commercialize the technology. And he was a really strong data scientist, had strong founder market fit in building a very technically complex tool, but by his own admission, did not have the business acumen to build this out to be profitable over time. And also didn't really have a sense of what went into founding a company. And so he came on and worked with us, and we went through a rigorous customer validation process. So talked to a bunch of people to try to identify where and how this technology could be utilized. And we helped him identify a CEO. So during that period of customer validation, once we got signal on the potential niche in the market, we worked with him basically as his interim founding team to start building out the product, and to get a sense of, okay, operationally, how do we stand up HR, payroll, all that jazz. And we put in a pre-seed note of funding into his business before he even had a CEO on board. And we helped him in filling in that gap before he was able to bring someone on. And then through our own network, we partnered him with an individual that actually used to work in the government on mis and disinformation campaigns and had deep domain expertise in that area. And so we were able to match the two of them together in order to go out and secure a seed round of funding. So we assisted him in the areas that he wasn't able to, didn't have background in executing on, and also didn't have the funds to hire into. And we were able to help match him with a CEO, which is typical of the type of support that we provide to founders that choose to work with us.
And likewise, I would plug that the University Tech Transfer offices, well, maybe they don't match you with your CEO. They may have a connection to somebody with nice domain expertise to at least partner with you to start thinking through go-to-market or some of the things you're going to need to think about, even if that person may not ultimately be your CEO. So I think, there's a lot of organizations that a founder can maybe tap into for that sort of help or that sort of networking. So I just want to, I know we're coming towards the end here. I want to kind of end on each of you kind of sharing what your top pieces of advice to startup founders would be when sourcing their CEO or the early team. So maybe we'll go around. Josh, you first, and then Sam, and then we'll end with John.
Be proactive in the relationship building approach. Consistently work to refine your messaging. Learn from others that have had successes, and then whatever the potential watch-outs would be, and recognizing it's a process. Things don't happen overnight, and so really nurture that.
Yeah, and I want to put in a quick plug, which is that as you're doing that networking, sometimes you may want to have a board of directors, or have somebody help you. Maybe they're not. You can't pay them to be the CEO, but maybe they could be an advisor or something like that. Even though you can't pay them cash, maybe you give them a little equity to advise you, right? And then you build a relationship.
Yeah, that's an easy way to jumpstart, and it's not really full-time commitment. So to bring on an exec chair or chair, someone that it's going to be a passion project that wants to get behind this, or an element of giving back for whatever reason. Matt, you flag are really good at that, and then their network becomes your network as well. That's usually a very cost-effective way to go about it at the earliest days.
Yeah, thanks. Sam.
You are your brand as a founder, and you need to own this process of identifying a co-founder. You can work with potentially an outsourced firm if you do choose to do that and have the funds, but ultimately you need to own this process because this person is going to be the co-owner of your business with you. And so taking leadership of that, I think, is really important. Utilize in-network connections with the asterisks that I provided earlier and be persistent because, again, this is a process and not something that will happen overnight. And it is better to take longer to hire the right person than to miss-hire at this early stage. So good luck.
And John.
Yeah, I mean, based on my own experiences, that my personal network has been the most valuable resource for me in finding CEOs, and so do whatever you can to build that network. And I think most academics, have strong networks within the sort of scientific community, but if you can branch out and get involved with maybe entrepreneurial organizations in your area. Engage with the incubator and accelerator communities, maybe associated with your university. We talked about licensing office as well. Just try to engage with as many people as possible because over time, that network that you build becomes incredibly valuable and it really becomes a powerful resource for finding people, with known background and known competencies that you can feel confident in hiring in as a CEO.
Yeah, that's great.
John, I might want to add just one thing on that, and something we share here, and it's really quite simple. Like, make a friend today, you'll be unbelievably successful in this business.
Mm-hmm.
And then what does a friend mean? Like, a friend can't only mean like when I have something to share, I reach out to you. You have to be proactive in that relationship building. And so if you could identify like 200 friends over a course of, call it 2 years, right? Where like that's a friend every half day, or what it might be, right? But if you do a friend a day and then you really work on purposely developing that relationship over a long period of time, like these things don't happen overnight, but your network becomes expansionary, compounding, one of the greatest investments, greatest inventions of all time. So if you really take that long term, I'm going to invest in this, you're going to be on the right side. If you start recruiting when you have a company, it becomes, I have a company, I'm going to recruit you. But if you know you're going to develop really lifelong relationships in a sphere that you want to be part of and center the ecosystem, I think you're setting yourself up for a long-term success, a lot of fun, and quite frankly, I believe it's way more meaningful to do it with people you like and have experiences with than it is when you just have outcomes, right? And John, you also said something earlier, companies aren't sold, that they're bought, right? And so if you build companies that are of high interest to others, that'll be take. So you focus on the right things early and often, the rest of the stuff is going to play its way out. Matt, thanks for having us all.
Yeah, look, as an investor, I love when investors approach to build their network, not try to just immediately start selling something out the gate. And that's very, very similar as you build a network of people. You don't want to just start your relationship off with selling. It's actually best to start your relationship off with, I'm an expert in this domain and you're an expert in this domain. Let's get coffee and share ideas. So I think that's great. So we're wrapping up here. There were 2 additional questions, which I can quickly address so we don't leave anyone hanging here. But there was a question about a CEO leaving within a year or 2, and do they get to keep shares of your company? And the answer is it depends. If they're a founder and you've given them founding shares at creation of the entity, yes. If they got stock options, those often vest over time. The longer they stay, the more of them they get to keep. So it's a depends, but consult your attorney. And then the second question, which was just thoughts on academic founders who successfully operated within an accelerator environment, and then they have to approach investors and how that relates to identifying external CEO. I think that's great. I mean, I think the high level answer is investors like us are very happy to see a startup or a founder who's worked with an accelerator. Hopefully they've gotten to be able to refine some of their messaging and some of their technology and story. And yeah, go talk to investors about people in the investor network who might be a domain expert or a potential CEO or an advisor or a board member, as we've been talking about today. So appreciate again all of these questions. And again, there's approaching the end here. There's a survey. It's very short, very short survey. We put in the chat there. So if you don't mind, we really do appreciate the responses there. There was a ton of information today, and want to thank Sam, John, and Josh for going through all of it with us. And as mentioned, there'll be a link that goes out with a recording to all the people who registered. So again, thank you all for joining us, and keep an eye out for registration for upcoming webinars. And in the meantime, we wish everyone well and enjoy the rest of everyone's day.